The village was silent before the screaming started. It was not yet dawn. The fog lay thick over the river like a burial shroud. Children slept. Farmers dreamed of harvest. And then, out of the grey mist, the Longships came. No warning, no time to pray. Just the low groan of oak hulls cutting water, and then men who looked like they had crawled straight out of a Norse nightmare, pouring onto the shore with axes raised and eyes burning like they felt nothing. Not fear, not mercy, nothing. By sunrise, the monastery was ash, the gold was gone, and every survivor who ran on purpose, because the Vikings needed them to. They needed them to talk. Most people think the Vikings won their wars with muscle, with iron and fury and sheer brutality. And yes, they were fearsome warriors, but the true genius of the Norse was not the axe in their hand. It was the terror they planted in your mind before they ever arrived. The Vikings understood something that most armies of the medieval world did not. You do not need to win every battle if your enemy is already broken before the fight begins. For nearly 3 centuries, from the late 700s to the early 1000s, Norse raiders transformed an entire continent into a place of dread. Kings lost sleep, churches moved their gold, coastal towns built walls facing the sea, and all of it, every frantic nail and every desperate prayer, was proof that the Vikings had already won something far more valuable than land. They had won the war inside people's heads. This is the story of how they did it. It started with fear, deliberately manufactured and carefully spread. When a Viking warband attacked a settlement, they did not simply take what they needed and leave quietly. They performed. The burning of a building served no military purpose once the valuables were gone, but a column of smoke rising against the morning sky could be seen for 30 miles. Every farmer who saw that smoke knew. Every mother who smelt it on the wind knew. And the story that survivor carried to the next village was never calm or measured. It was breathless. It was wild. It grew with every retelling. The Vikings understood the power of the witness. Leave one person alive, and you leave behind a messenger. That messenger does your work for you. By the time Norse raiders reached the next town downriver, half the population had already fled. The ones who stayed were already defeated in spirit. They had been fighting the Vikings in their nightmares for weeks. The geography of their attacks made defense feel impossible. The Longship, that revolutionary vessel, could sail open ocean and navigate shallow rivers with equal ease.
This was not accidental, it was strategic. Viking raiders could strike inland towns that believed themselves safe, far from any coast. They appeared when no enemy was supposed to appear. And when an army cannot predict where the blow will fall, it must spread itself thin trying to guard everything, which means it guards nothing well. Imagine being a local lord in 9th century France. Your walls face the road, your garrison watches the road, and then 50 warriors materialize from the river behind your market square, moving fast and silent as wolves through fog. Before your men can regroup, it is over. That feeling, that sick, helpless feeling, spread like plague across England, Ireland, and the Frankish Empire. Rulers began paying Viking leaders enormous sums of silver simply to leave. The Danes called this payment Danegeld, protection money, proof that terror, not conquest, was often the Norse end goal. Then there was the mythology they wore like armor. Norse warriors cultivated an image of themselves as something beyond human. The Berserkers, those warriors who fought in states of violent, almost supernatural frenzy, were spoken of across Europe as men who could not be wounded, who felt no pain, who moved through iron and fire untouched. Whether this was ritual, psychological conditioning, or simply the fog of legend, it does not matter. It was believed. And a soldier who believes he faces something that cannot die has already lost the fight in his own chest before a single blow is traded. The Norse gods themselves were gods of chaos and war. Odin, who demanded sacrifice. Thor, whose hammer shattered mountains. When Vikings went to war under these banners, they carried with them the weight of an entire cosmic mythology. They were not just men, they were the instruments of something ancient and unstoppable. That belief radiated outward, it infected their enemies. It made resistance feel not just dangerous, but cosmically futile. Reputation in the Viking world was a currency more valuable than silver. A single famous raid could sustain a warrior's fearsome standing for a decade. News traveled slowly in the medieval world, but bad news traveled fast. Word of a devastating attack on Lindisfarne in 793 spread across Christendom within months. Scholars wrote of it in horrified dispatches. Church leaders called it a sign of divine punishment. And the Vikings? They had not even needed a large force. A handful of ships, a few dozen men, and suddenly all of Europe knew their name. That disproportionate return, maximum fear from minimal force, was the masterwork of Norse strategy. They punched far above their actual numbers because fear multiplied them in the imagination of their enemies. An army of 50 became, in terrified whispers, an army of 500. In the end, the greatest weapon the Vikings ever forged was not made of iron, it was made of dread. It was woven from smoke and rumor and the careful, calculated performance of savagery. They understood that a mind conquered by fear needs no chains. It builds its own prison. And for 3 centuries, they held an entire world hostage inside that prison, not always with their armies, but always with their legend. The Longships are gone now. The raids have long since faded into history books and museum halls. But the fear they engineered, that was so complete, so perfectly designed, that we are still talking about it 1,000 years later. That was their greatest victory.